I'm Szifra Birke. My co-host Edna Lazat is not here today. She's teaching and traveling, but I am thrilled to have with me today Naomi Karten, the principal of Karten Associates. And by way of introduction, I would actually just like to read an introduction that is often read about Naomi. Naomi Karten may be the only short, left-handed, introverted female speaker you'll ever meet who has a psychology background and extensive technical, customer support, and management experience. For more than 20 years, Naomi has divided her time between training, consulting, speaking, writing, and skiing. Her specialty when not on the slopes is helping organizations improve customer satisfaction, strengthen teamwork, and manage change. This is something you wouldn't know about Naomi, that she has delivered seminars and presentations to more than 100,000 people in locations as diverse as Tokyo, Vancouver, Amsterdam, Zurich, Costa Rica, as well as all over the US and Canada. So it's very exciting to have you here. For 12 years, Naomi has published Perceptions and Realities, her lively chuckle-generating newsletter. Numerous issues are posted for you on her website at www.naomikarten.com, and you'll get to see that spelled out under her name many times, under her picture many times today as we're going through the show. I have a couple of Naomi's books that you should know about. Managing Expectations, working with people who want more, better, faster, sooner, now, and Communication Gaps and How to Close Them. So, there are other books that Naomi has written, there are lots of things that she's done, but today what we're going to talk about is about change and transition, the stages we go through when confronted with major change. And today's show is called Coping with Chaos, which I think I was supposed to say at the very beginning. So, welcome, Naomi.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. So, one of the things you and I talk a lot about, because we talk about transition a lot, is the fact that people actually don't like to change, that they're pretty uncomfortable with making changes and want to hold on pretty tight to the known. And I wonder if you'd be interested in speaking to that at the beginning.
It's true, and certainly we can't make an absolute statement that nobody ever likes change, because of course in many situations we do, but there really is something in the human condition that people tend to like things the way they are. And I came across a couple of quotes just in the past week from the newspaper that I've got to share with you. One was from the Boston Globe just a week ago about a villager in a small town where the mayor had died but nevertheless was reelected. And this villager said, "I know he died, but I don't want change."
There you go. Now there's the person who really doesn't like change.
And then another one that's along the same lines was from a retail establishment that made some changes to its product line, and customers complained and they had to change some things back, and the head of the company said, "Every time we change something, there are customers who liked it the way it was." Yeah, we tend to like things the way they were.
Wow. So what do you think that's about? Any thoughts?
Well, it isn't so much that we don't like change so much as there's a discomfort, there's an uncertainty with what we will be changing to. So many people will choose to change at times, but I think it's the real, the change that is either unexpected or unwanted that is foisted on us. It's sudden, it is unexpected, or it's simply traumatic in some way that makes people very uncomfortable, because it means in some way giving up what I will call the current normal. And I use that phrase specifically because probably as we continue I'll be talking about the transition from the old normal to the new normal. So what we have right now is the current normal, that place that feels safe, feels secure, feels at least familiar, because you know those phrases, the enemy we know is better than the enemy we don't know.
There you go. There you go. So what you're saying is there's more than one kind of change. There's change that we might initiate.
Right.
And then there's change that happens to us.
Yes.
So the happen to us could be we get laid off. Mm-hmm. We lose someone we love through illness and death, mm-hmm. or divorce. what are other kinds of situations where people encounter change that is unwanted for them? Reorganization.
Yeah, in the organizational setting, I often ask my audiences, what are some changes you've experienced? And reorganization is number one in almost every single audience. It's really interesting because they've been through so many and they know how it feels. A change in management, the loss of a team member, even a team member that they don't like, because it will have application or implications for their continued work effort. A change in the project or a change in priorities, or certainly in personal lives, like you said, the death or illness of a loved one, the end of a marriage, an illness, your in-laws coming to visit for 3 months, any of these kinds of things. And we deal with them all the time, and we are always dealing with change and transition, and we have some at work, and invariably there are some at home. They're going out, we're dealing with them all the time. So we may not like change, but life sure is full of them continuously.
So it's our job, isn't it, to learn to understand that things are not going to stay the same. I love your term, the current normal, because it really, it just so highlights for me listening to it that I better not get too attached to what's happening right now, in the sense that at some point it will change.
Yeah, and I wouldn't encourage people not to get attached as much as developing that wisdom that says things may change. And I think it is a wisdom. I think it takes some real thinking about this issue and recognizing all the changes we have already experienced in our lives to say, yeah, whatever I have now, and look back at your earlier life and all the things you've been through that you might not have anticipated and you have survived. So there's that kind of fear, I think, that people develop when they are confronted with major change, that this time I might not get through it.
And if you can look back and recognize how many successful transitions you've made, and maybe even that you resisted, like what we're saying, you resisted that transition, it became the new normal, and then you resisted that new normal and came through again through another transition. And
that's a good way to put it, because even when you get to the new normal, it stays the new normal until it becomes the old normal, because along comes another change. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could kind of reach a new normal and have life just kind of stabilize for some period of time, so we could just kind of settle in and relax? But life doesn't work like that.
Right.
It's got more surprises and more changes in place. There are actually stages that people go through in experiencing change.
Right, so why don't you talk about those?
Yeah. And it's really, anybody who thinks about changes you've experienced can identify with this. It's fairly simple. We might start with the way things are, that thing that becomes the old normal. The way things are, whether that's a happy state or an unhappy state, it's simply the way things are, the comfortable place. Then along comes the change, and that can be a sudden surprise. It can be something that's known, but along it comes. It can be something little, it can be something big, it can be something traumatic. And it tends to throw the individual or the group experiencing it into a stage that we call chaos. Chaos is can be a very turbulent experience. It's a time of decreased concentration, difficulty focusing, perhaps absent-mindedness, increase perhaps in inaccuracies, just doing things wrong. It can be accompanied by physical symptoms like a headache or a stomach ache. And that doesn't mean that if you have a stomach ache, you're necessarily in chaos. That could just be the third piece of pizza you ate last night. But there are often these physical symptoms as well as emotional reactions that are more or less unlike you, like anger or anxiety or being upset or being more talkative than usual or quieter than usual. I have this, you may wonder what this is about. This is my chaos toy. This is my experience of what chaos feels like. And if anybody has ever experienced chaos.
So it's you're saying it sort of twists us, turns us, and it doesn't have, it's not linear sequential. Your little toy doesn't make it. nice and neat.
That's a good way to put it. It's not a straight line, and in fact, what people often do, we talk about people being in denial. And what that's about is people kind of yanking back and saying, no, I like it the way it was. I don't want to go there. And it's a perfectly normal reaction. In fact, chaos is a normal reaction, and that's very important for people to understand when they go through a big change.
Well, I know for me, it's been really, really helpful to understand that there are stages, so that when I'm going through a transition and I'm in that chaos, at least I can stand outside of the experience for some moments and say, okay, I'm in this because this is what happens. There's stage one where there's this, ending of things as I knew it, and then there's this middle stage that you call chaos, where it's formless and shapeless and turbulent and confusing, and things I can't figure out exactly what to do. And I now know better than to try to make things the old normal, because there is no going home again in that sense. Yeah. I need to take the time to go through to the other side. But it's not easy to stay still, quiet yourself, and do the right thing during that chaos.
Right, so you've already achieved the wisdom. As an experienced transition expert yourself, you've achieved that wisdom, that it's really a mark of maturity in dealing with transition to recognize that you are in chaos when you are in it. It's hard because you're in it.
You're still uncomfortable.
You're uncomfortable, but to step back, like you say, almost stand outside yourself and say, I am in chaos, and I don't like the way it feels, but I will come through it. And it may take some time, and it may not feel very good, but I will survive, and I know that because I have survived. I can look back and see that I have survived all along. Come out of this chaos, go into the remaining stages, which are the period of adjustment, where you start to gain familiarity and comfort with the new normal you were transitioning to, and then ultimately that new normal.
Right. So that's great to think about. There actually is a process. We can't tell unless we learn about transition, because it just feels like a bunch of stuff going on. But I'm interested in knowing, are there situations that you can think of that we could help our audience? Can we hang some of these stages on a situation or two?
Examples?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let me give a personal example, then I can offer a more business-oriented example. The personal example is someone I know personally, whose husband died suddenly. Tragic situation, and a very upbeat, relentlessly upbeat, just absolutely wonderful, cheerful.
Relentlessly upbeat.
One of the few relentlessly upbeat people I know who I can tolerate, despite her being relentlessly upbeat. And when I saw her shortly after, and in the period shortly after, she was really doing fine. She was somehow able to smile through it, to talk about what happened, to deal with it. And several of us who were friends of hers thought, she'll be okay. She'll come through it. She'll deal with it. And for a while she did. And then she plunged. And I think when a relentlessly upbeat person plunges, they plunge as far down as they were once up. And she took a nosedive. And one of the obvious signs was that she had changed her voicemail message from this perky message that I'd call her just to hear her voicemail message, to something that was somber and serious. And it was really frightening to experience her in this place where suddenly everything had changed. And now this would affect her work and her ability to do it, her family life, where she lived. It affected all aspects of her life, and it took her a long time to come through it. And we worried about whether she would, and she needed time. She came gradually back. She moved to another location. She found a job. It took a while, but she found a job. And what do you know? She found another man in her life, and a few months ago they got married, and she is as happy as can be. And I want to mention that just because her situation turned out happy doesn't mean that the new normal is necessarily happier or better than the old normal. not so.
Not always. But you know what is true, and I would even say often, I would say when people make what I would call a healthy or good transition, they bring the best of themselves through that chaos into the new normal. And so the self that they have is more fortified because they have the best of their old selves, you know, granted, you know, churned around during that interval where things are chaotic and uncomfortable. But often we come out stronger, healthier, more well-equipped for having survived and, again, pulled the best of what's creative and possible out of this time where we're not just in the humdrum of what our life was. I don't mean the life had to be humdrum, but the routine. The routine, that we
exactly.
had.
Yeah, in fact, it's said that chaos can be a time of great creativity. You know, when you're in this state and you've lost the old normal and you have no choice but to find or come around to a new normal, you're sometimes willing to try some new things, make some adjustments that you might not have considered otherwise, so that you at least can set the stage for another normal that might be at least as good and sometimes it will be better. It's only looking back that you can appreciate that.
Yes.
That's what's so uncomfortable, is looking forward. It looks like the end of everything that was safe and secure and familiar.
Someone the other day said to me, it's like either holding a trapeze and swinging to the other side, not knowing if there's a net and before you grab on. Someone else said, I feel like I'm holding both parts of the trapeze and I don't want to let either side go because
that's interesting.
You know, I'm uncomfortable. I just don't have a good enough sense of what's in front of me, but I don't necessarily want what's behind me, but it's safe and I know it.
Yeah, you can almost imagine that the two ends of the trapeze pulling apart because you are being pulled in both directions. Oh, that's a wonderful metaphor. I like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So I think part of what we're saying is that sometimes change happens, like in the example you gave, sometimes change happens and right away the person goes into chaos. Yeah. Other times there's a delay before the chaos hits, and it seems like the person is able to have the new, whatever we want to call the new normal or the new beginning, but in fact it's a sort of pseudo new normal or a pseudo new beginning because they really they've made the change, but the emotional transition hasn't had the chance to catch up yet.
Yeah, because there's kind of coping with it and learning the new steps or the new procedures or the new relationships, but you're right, the emotional part of it has to catch up so that you're feeling whole.
Right.
Again, it's not just externals or what the outside world might see in looking at you.
Right. Right. So some people talk about the difference between change and transition. Change is you moved into the new house, you had a baby, you got a new job, but the transition is all this stuff that we're talking about. The whole process of getting from the old normal to the new normal.
Yeah, change is all about loss. Losing, dealing with the loss of an old way and transitioning to a new way. And in fact, I came across, you'll find this very interesting, there's a language in the South Pacific called, and I don't know how to pronounce this, it's Etinoi, I think, Etinoi, something like that, where they have multiple words for loss. Now in English, loss is loss. But in this language, they have at least 4 words. One is loss of someone through death, as we would experience it. There's another word for loss, the loss of an object which can be or has been replaced. The loss of a way of life, such as losing a job. And the loss of a sense of well-being, such as the loss of security.
Wow.
And then there's also a suffix that they can put in front of each of these words to indicate whether it's a loss of something that can be replaced, such as an object, or it's a permanent loss, such as a loss of a human being or a pet or something of that kind.
Wow.
Isn't that rich? I mean, we think of ourselves as being so evolved in our culture, but this is a South Pacific small island culture where they have the wisdom to recognize that loss takes many forms.
Right, and they're not in as big a hurry as we are in our culture to just get through.
Yeah.
That's another whole show to talk about loss, and I really am tempted to, but I don't want to lose the example going back to where we were, and you were saying that there was a personal example, and then I brought you somewhere else. And
right, the business example. Well, one that comes to mind was a fellow who had a small business and an office that he had been in for a number of years, and he was very fond of that location. It worked very well for his business, and then due to some management changes of the building complex, he had to give up that office. He knew he would never find anything he liked as well, and in fact he put off looking for the new office as long as he could. The denial, the not wanting to deal with it. Well, he finally found another place, and he moved, and his staff moved, and they settled in, and there's a period of adjustment there, and over time, he didn't even notice this was happening, but he came to like the new place even better. And the real proof was that eventually, after he had settled in and the management of the old building was ready for new tenants, he was invited to come back. And he said, no, I like it where I am now.
Wow.
Another case that, you fight it, and then you recognize that this is okay. This is maybe even better.
Yeah, there you go. So once you get through that, whatever we want to call that middle stage, that confusing, uncomfortable, unfamiliar time, then we can breathe again.
Literally. You can sit back, hopefully not have to deal with another one too soon again, but begin to just be in, again, the comfort of what is now the new normal, which of course then transitions to become the old normal, so that you can then deal with another change.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about when I was first learning about transition, I was captivated by understanding that this really had a sequence, that there was a process by which we went through small transitions, new car, where's that switch for the radio? The muscle memory that you have is just not, it doesn't work that well, all the way to losing something that can't be replaced.
Right.
And so from small to big, the process is the same. The size is different. So therefore the impact on us is different, but the process is the same.
Right.
And again, that, to use a different way of talking about it, right, there's that ending that necessitates a loss of something as we knew it, and then this middle zone that's uncomfortable, and then eventually, unbeknownst to us, for exactly when it's going to end, some mass gets created in the new self, and we start to move forward. But what's also true in the experiences I've had personally and professionally is that it's not quite as clean as ABC.
Right.
You would agree with that?
Right, and although we can say there are stages, they're not necessarily linear. You can be in this horrible, uncomfortable chaos stage and begin to make an adjustment and slip right back into chaos. You can slip back into chaos and again try to pull back to the old normal. So it's not, if you just go through 3 or 4 stages, you're there. It can be iterative, and we're all different. We deal with change differently. We're receptive to change in different ways, so we each have our own experience of change. And furthermore, what you experience as a major change, I might not, and vice versa. And something that for me is a big change at one point in my life might not be at another point in my life. So we have to respect what is a big change for you or me, and they may or may not
now
be the same.
Now that's really important and interesting, and I've never really thought about this as a dynamic in relationships that are personal relationships. Those could be friendships, they could be romantic relationships, partnerships, marriages, parents and children,
right,
as well as, of course, all of the work shifts, and how differently we respond, and how do we respect those differences.
Yeah, and I see this especially in the workplace, since I work with a lot of organizations and a team dealing with some kind of change. They don't all go in lockstep and embrace the change and say, here we are. People will respond differently, and it's a challenge for the manager as well as the team members who are at different places at different times.
Yeah. So, maybe like grieving.
It is.
Right, that we each do that we could lose the same person.
Mm-hmm.
We could each lose a mom or a dad or an uncle or someone dear to us, and have very different ways of grieving, and different timetables, different styles.
Exactly, and that term grieving or mourning is something that is used largely in the case of the loss of someone through death or a pet through death. But in fact, it applies every bit as well to the loss of anything: the job, the location, the way of the habit of doing something a certain way. Any of these things, there's a certain process that we go through, and it is the emotional process that justifies that term grieving or that term mourning, because it's still relevant.
Mm-hmm. And I think so too. What I've observed, and I'm interested in your observations about this, is how difficult it is in our culture to make room for that, just that whole notion that a change requires some adjusting time. That somehow we think we're supposed to, like I think Bill Bridges in his book Transitions talks about unplugging the refrigerator and plugging it back in. We think we can be unplugged from our lives, and we're supposed to plug back in.
And there it goes.
And we're supposed to operate perfectly.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons this topic has such fascination for me, and I think you as well in your own work, that especially where we see it most often is the death of a loved one, and people will be solicitous and supportive for a while, but then the attitude seems to take over of, get over it already. Well, it doesn't work that way. We're still grieving, we're still mourning, we're still dealing with it, and the same as every bit is true for all these other kinds of loss, that we need to, your terminology is right on target, we need to somehow make space, and that doesn't mean mollycoddle people and say, you don't have to do your job or you don't have to take care of your kids, but at least acknowledge that there is something people are dealing with that simply takes time. Chaos is a normal stage of change.
Right, and we've only got a few minutes left, and I guess I want to just underscore something you said really early in the show, and then I'd like to hear what your thoughts are that you'd like to leave people with. But I would just like to underscore that during that chaos time, we are not functioning at our best.
Right.
That there is preoccupation, physiological. Our brain cannot do what it can do at its best. So how do you make sure to sleep more, drink less, exercise more, read more, do the things that are nourishing to you, truly nourishing. So.
Yeah, and get support if support will be helpful. That is, don't resist asking for help. Also, don't resist turning away help if it simply doesn't suit you at that time. In other words, the issue of self-care, taking care of yourself in that situation. And really one of the most important things I want to make sure we get in is that when you are in the state of chaos, do not make any important, irreversible changes in
decisions.
Your life. Decisions, because you're not thinking clearly. And it's so tempting when you're in that horrible chaos of saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to move, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to... And that's why the wisdom of being able to say, I know I'm in chaos, I need to just get through it, is so important, so that you don't make a change that later on you will come to seriously regret.
Yes, yes. So it sounds like you and I have each seen people who've done that, who were so determined to get out of the chaos that they made a decision that really was a detour that was going to be more like a boomerang and end up really costing them dearly.
Yeah, and I think the way that some people think of it is actually to put a time frame on it, and you may already do this with some of your own clients, is to say, when you're in chaos, don't make an important decision for 3 months, 6 months, 2 weeks, whatever is the pertinent time frame, to have something more tangible to have in mind. Look at the calendar and simply don't make any major changes in your life until you've come through and are on your way out of the chaos and